Welcome to the Hero's Journey podcast, where we share stories of hope, healing, and resilience. Today, I am so excited to share one of my dearest friends' stories, Michelle Wu. Just a little bit about Michelle and who she is. Michelle Wu is an intuitive mentor and generational trauma healing guide dedicated to empowering women across generations with a profound commitment to understanding the complex roots of trauma. Michelle supports her clients through transformative journeys toward personal freedom and emotional wellness. Michelle's mission is to break cycles of generational trauma and help women cultivate resilience, self-awareness, and holistic healing. Through her compassionate guidance, she creates a safe space for growth, transformation, and deeper connection within herself and her community. And most of all, she is one of my dearest friends. Michelle, welcome. I am so grateful and honored to share this space with you today, to share your story.
Thank you for having me. This is a long time coming,
Yes.
right where we're meant to be.
Very, very exciting. We've been talking about this for a long time. You have personally shared your journey with me, and you and I we've known each other, since about 2020 we met. And from that time, we started out as like working together, and then through that now we've just become really good friends, and we've spent a lot of time alongside each other sharing stories and sharing our what we're going through at the time, and we're always like so in alignment with each other. And I just love your journey so much. You have shown so much strength and courage. um, and I'm just so inspired by the way that you show up for yourself, and the way that you show up, the way that you've even shown up for me, has just been so supportive. And I know that you and I bounce back and forth on whatever you're going through. I'm
Totally.
there to be your support, and then whatever I'm going through, you're there. And we've kind of both weaved that in and out of each other's lives. And I'm just really excited for you not only to share your story today, but share your generational story and your background and kind of where your life's journey began with your family and your heritage. So take us through your story. Who is Michelle? What is your generational background? Where were you on your life's journey before you experienced this shift? And what brought you to where you are now?
Thank you for that introduction. Man, where do I begin? Um, I was born and raised in a small town known as Palm Springs, California. I am the first generation in my family. My father immigrated from China, my mother immigrated from Japan, and growing up in a small town, being a minority in that small town was interesting. I was one of four Asians in my entire school, one of them being my own sibling, so there was not much diversity. So I grew up from a very young age, not feeling connected to my culture, not really feeling connected to the American culture, having to assimilate at such a young age. And that really shaped who I was as a person and how I view other people. But also just this deep longing of trying to understand where I came from, where my parents came from, even my grandparents. I never knew my grandparents. So I've always had that sense of who are they?
Wow. Yeah, I can imagine how challenging that would have been for, as you explained to me, growing up with only four other Asian children, one of them being your sibling. Um, yeah, it must have really shaped the way that you are, because you came from somewhere different than America, and now you're having to experience being a part of this culture and another culture. I went through a similar thing. I had an Italian background growing up in Australia, and those two cultures are really different. So it was
Totally.
like, who am I in all of this? And you kind of have to create your own little world in a way to fit in. So tell me about that. Like, what was that like for you?
Yeah, I think it was, put me in a position that allowed me to see the world differently, but see people differently. And I've always been so curious about learning about different cultures and where people come from. And, you know, my family genealogy and all that. So I actually went to school for child and family development with an emphasis in family studies. So I could really hone in on that and learn more about, our family systems and where we come from and how that shapes us as humans.
Yeah. And what was it like? What was it actually like for you growing up at school, like being one of the four Asian kids?
Yeah, I mean, just to backtrack a little bit, but I'm 99.7% Chinese, which is crazy. But my father was born in China and my mom was actually born and raised in Japan. So I grew up with Chinese influence, Japan influence, and American influence. I mean, talk about confusing as a child, all these different cultures meshed into one. But I think that's really made me who I am today. And I'm very grateful for it. And I'm learning the intricacies and the specialty of that being an adult and looking back on my past.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And it's so important. It's such a important message, I feel, for everybody these days, well, just in general, always, is to understand your culture, understand where you come from, so that you understand yourself and
Exactly.
like the very depths of who you are, and being able to show up in that way, not in the way that the schooling was, or the your experience at school, or growing up with very other few kids from other places. So what was your relationship with your family? Like, tell us about your family life, as and like that contrast of like, okay, you've got this family with these beliefs and this culture, and living in an American uh, culture as well, like bringing those two worlds together with your family, your parents.
Yeah, I guess I've always felt in between, I've never felt like I belonged to my culture. I never felt I belonged to the American culture. I've always had this sense of in between. And I've struggled with that my whole life, I always looked at it growing up as a bad thing, but as an adult, I've kind of realized that's kind of my superpower. Having both those perspectives, understanding, those two things did influence how I viewed the world, but in a great way.
Yeah. And I know that that's part of your mission now. That's part of your passion, is being able to really speak about that. You've shared that with me for such a long time, just really wanting to step into your background, your culture, and honor your generation. And leading up to, this question here, this next question, I know that you and I have both experienced a lot of loss recently. Grief has been something that has been showing up for a lot of us lately. I personally, for you and I, have shared, this grieving process together. What, or can you tell us, or how do you feel about sharing your story with your dad?
Yeah, thank you for asking. My dad passed in January of 2024. I think by the time this episode comes out, it'd be around 2 years. Um, my dad was the first person I ever lost. I never had lost anyone in my entire life. Again, not knowing my grandparents. The first funeral I attended, it was his. I sat front row in between my mom and my brother, and it changed everything. Completely changed everything. And I was just speaking about this with my therapist actually, but I really didn't start truly living until I experienced grief, until I experienced the loss of a loved one, a primary parent, you know? It changed just everything, the way I viewed life, you know? It's such a trip to think about somebody's life from the very beginning to the very end, you know? It's hard not to question, you know, what is this all for? What was his life for, you know? And that was my father, and he went through such a different life path to be where he is today and to give me the opportunities I have today. So, you know, I've reflected a lot, you know, it's like his whole life, everything he's gone through. What legacy does he leave behind in me, and how can I carry that on?
Ah, so beautiful. I have to take a deep breath because, wow, so many people listening to this, including myself, um, who have experienced loss, will be able to relate to this so much. And, this is why we're here today. This is why we're sharing this story. And this is why, it's so powerful that you are honoring your generation, because what I hear from you saying that is you actually want to honor him.
Mhm. Ah, thank you for pointing that out, cause yeah, um, as I approach the 2 years, you know, how can I honor him? How can I honor his life? How can I express myself wholeheartedly, you know? I mean, you and I have had so many conversations about this, but it's so much more than these private conversations, you know? We need to be talking about this more because I remember losing my father. It's something I've never gone through, you know? And you know me, I'm like, my nature is to take care of others. And for the first time at 32 years old, I needed to be taken care of. And that was an adjustment. That was really hard for me to take a step back and receive all the love and the support that I give. But going through something I've never been through, such as grief and loss.
Yeah. And honestly, before we had this conversation, I think was this morning, um, I didn't realize that your father was the first person that you experienced loss.
Yeah, it's kind of trippy to think about. And I
It's
replay what I said, you know, so my father was the first person I ever lost. The first funeral I ever went to, I was front row. And that hits different. My parents were together for 44 years. You know, they were together most of their life. And overnight, I became my mom's emergency contact. I became everything. I became that person in her life that had to step up. And I just, yeah, I think back to when it all happened. It's such a visceral experience for me. You know, I remember sitting at the funeral home and picking out his flowers for his funeral and handling things with lawyers and all the things people don't talk about that comes with grief, you know? And overnight, I just stepped into that role and I'm grateful, you know, but it's something that I was not expecting. It was something that I really had to own all of a sudden, unexpectedly.
I find it interesting. Thank you for sharing all of that. Also, I find it interesting that you said, like, all of a sudden you needed to be taken care of, like you didn't know, like, what the fuck. And it's such a shocking feeling, and in the midst of it you were still taking care of your mom. And it's just such a beautiful um strength that you have and
Thank
that you
you.
hold, to be able to do that, and to be able to also be there for your mom as well. How did this affect or change your life? I know you mentioned that before. It just completely rocked your world. In what ways? Like, and I love also, I'm gonna give you a chance to speak, but I love that you said you didn't start living until your
I
father
experienced death.
passed.
Yeah,
Such powerful words.
thank you. Um, yeah. I really didn't start living until I experienced death. I'm first generation in my family. I think something what people don't talk about often is being a child of immigrants and coming to America and assimilating, and you feel this overwhelming sense of guilt for not having as hard of a life as your parents, and the vast difference between my mom and dad's childhood to mine um, is crazy. We've had such different lives, and as a child of immigrants, I've grown up with a lot of shame and guilt and for a good life that I've had. Yeah, I think before my dad passed, I was in that shame and that guilt. And when he did pass, it switched from honor. What an honor to be his daughter. What an honor to have such a warrior of a father.
I love that so much. Yeah, like that's so beautiful to be able to release shame and guilt around who you are and who your culture is and be able to like fully embrace it and embody it. Can you tell us a little bit about your dad? Like, I would love to hear. I've heard stories of his history, but I love hearing this story of your dad.
My dad. My dad was Pan Fei, born Pan Fei. He was dad to me, and he was Peter to everyone else. He was the youngest of six siblings. He was born on a rural rice farm in Canton, China. I don't even think we can find it anymore. But he came from nothing, and he was actually the first and only person in his family to immigrate to the US.
Really?
Yeah,
That is so cool.
it's kind of wild to think about.
And he was the youngest.
He was the youngest of six siblings and the only one in his family to immigrate to the US. And back when he was 20 something back in China, it was very much communist. It still is today, but very much so back then. So he left everything he knew to start a new life, to go after new possibilities. I know he carried a lot of guilt with that as well because it was, he says it's luck, but I think it's because of who he is as a person. But someone from high school remembered him. And when she made it to America and built a life for herself, she reached out to my dad and was like, I have a job for you in America. I want to help you. And by the grace of God and the grace of universe's plan, he was able to immigrate to the US with the support of his friend. But it wasn't easy, of course. Like I said, my dad was born in a very rural area of Canton, China. There was not much around. So part of his journey was fleeing from his small town, which included, hiding out in the mountains, waiting for it to be safe for him to cross. Um, Him and two other people tried 3 times. They were thrown in Chinese prison. They were tortured. They were put through so much. That's where I think a lot of my dad's trauma started or came from. But by the third time, they made it out. They swam across a peninsula to Hong Kong, where they found safety, and they stayed in Hong Kong, worked, saved up until they were able to come to the US. It's quite wild how significant and how much he went through in his journey to even have a chance.
Yeah.
Nothing was a guarantee. He still had to, make it to the US. And once he got there, the woman's family, they owned a restaurant, which is still very well known today in LA, but they sponsored him working in Chinese restaurants throughout LA. Started from the ground up, being a busboy to a waiter. He did all the things.
I feel like we need to go to that restaurant since we're restaurant buddies.
Right? We need
Have
to
you been
try
to
it
the
out.
restaurant where he
It's
started?
funny because they're all over the place. And when I go to LA for work, that's his little sign of saying hello. But I'll run into like a Sam Wu restaurant, and I'm like, that's the restaurant that sponsored my dad to come to America.
And I know as somebody who has immigrated to the US, it is not freaking easy
Absolutely
to
not.
be sponsored by
Yeah.
somebody
Yeah.
and to like actually get that. But for him to actually, for someone to just be like, hey, I'll sponsor you.
Mhm.
And I can imagine back in those days, this was even years before I moved here. Like, I could imagine that process. Yeah, it's not easy. It's not an easy thing to do.
No.
So, wow, what an amazing journey. And then from there, where did he grow from the restaurant business?
So what's cool is that my dad worked in Chinese restaurants and he got a his friend had said, "Hey, I have a job for you at this Chinese restaurant in Palm Springs." LA is very competitive. It was very expensive. So he's like, "Okay, I'll move to Palm Springs." That Chinese restaurant in Palm Springs was my grandmother's. That is where he met my mother. My grandma owned a Cantonese restaurant with Polynesian drinks back in the 70s in Palm Springs. Lucille Ball and Frank Sinatra would go to her restaurant, and that was the origin of where my mom and dad met.
Oh, and
Yeah.
that's the origin of where little Michelle was
The
born.
House of Bamboo is what it was called. That's where it started.
Wow, that's amazing. And I'm even just thinking of like when I first met you, your your family's house burnt
Oh
down,
my gosh, I forgot about that.
which is, I know, which is another like triumph that, with your family and your family's history and also the strength in you. I think that's when I really started to be like, whoa, this girl is badass. She's like handling this like a boss and, just dealing with this so gracefully, especially, with everything. You have been through a lot in the past few years, specifically with your dad. And thank you for sharing that story of your dad. I love hearing about him through you because I can feel his spirit through you when you speak about him. Um, I did want to ask you what the most challenging part about losing your dad was. I know we talked about how that affected and changed your life. But what was the most challenging part about this for you? And two questions, I guess. How did you overcome, like, how have you been moving through this?
Yeah, thank you for asking. I think going through this for the first time, I really was just like, what the fuck do I do? For the first time, I had no knowledge of this, you know? And I just remember being in the depths of my grief, like right when it happened. And it just, this could go two ways, right? I could self destruct, I could hang out with the wrong people, I could throw myself in work, or I can admit that I'm not okay and lean on the people who have been in my life. And I think back on the timing of everything, jumping back to 2020, but 2020 was a big year for a lot of people. And that's really when I started having what they say a spiritual awakening. But really diving into mental health and self care and regulating our nervous systems and building community. I mean, we got super close in COVID, and my best friends today I met in COVID, you know? So I think that was priming me for this time in my life. And I look back and I'm like, thank God this happened at this time in my life because I have support systems, I have resources, I have not only that, but I was working and still am today working with some of the top wellness influencers in the world. I was in that, you know, aura already. So for the first time, I was just like, I needed to be the one to receive the support and to take a step back from the caregiver role and be cared for.
Totally. Yeah. I remember the call. I remember when you called me that day and I just knew I just knew that this was going to be such a big opening for you for your healing and how much it's going to shift that awareness for you to want to really step forward and share the legacy of your family and generation, and what helped you the most to be able to move through grief? Because grief is such a, I think you said it at the beginning of our conversation, is that there's not a lot of space in this world for grief.
Mhm.
Um, how did you support yourself through those really deep, dark grief moments?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to the thing of, I really didn't start living until I experienced death, and that's living as in truly feeling my emotions.
Mm,
Not to be spiritual, but my moon is in Capricorn. I like to explain my feelings versus feeling them.
mm.
So grief, I mean, I had no choice. Grief cracked me wide open. I mean, I had never felt those emotions, let alone all at once.
Yeah.
It was consuming.
Can you talk about some of those emotions? Because grief is so different for everybody, and we can't put a label on it. We can't put a timing on grief. We just have to really experience it, like you said, and feel the feelings around it, even though that's so fucking hard at times and we don't want to. What were some of the ways that you faced grief, or what were some of the things that were coming up for you, just so like listeners, people listening to this who may have experienced loss or going through grief times, what are some of the things that you were feeling that maybe others can relate to and feel like, oh, I'm not alone, I experienced a little bit of that myself.
Sacred rage. You know me. I mean, I'm all earth signs. I'm very grounded. I'm someone who has my shit together. I'm there for my friends. Sacred rage. I had never been so angry. I remember it so clearly. I had come back to my own space just to have some downtime before the funeral. And I remember walking up my stairs and there was nothing there. I was expecting maybe like, I don't know, I never had been through something like this. So I was walking up the stairs and I was like, there's going to be flowers and a note on my door. And my friend is going to be there waiting for me. But there was nothing but grief. Grief met me at that door. And everything around me was the same, but nothing was the same after that. And I just remember walking in my door and just feeling so angry. Just feeling so angry, like, why is this happening? I never had felt that anger. And I remember I did what I knew how to do. I went and grabbed the first oracle deck that I could find. And I remember it was so funny. I was like pulling cards, asking for a sign, and I was getting frustrated. It wasn't the sign. And I remember just like taking my deck of cards and like chucking it at the wall and like saying, fuck you or something. And of course, the card that falls out was the exact sign that I was asking for. And in that moment, I just started laughing. But I just remember that being such an angry point in my life. And then automatically it switches to laughter and like, oh, I am connected. He's here even though he's not physically here. It's just all the emotions all at once. You're crying because you miss him, but then you're crying to be alive. You're grateful to be alive.
Yeah, I understand that feeling very deeply, that sacred rage that you're speaking of, and just being able to let it out in a healthy way, in a healthy manner. What has helped you with that sacred rage? Not that it needs to go away. Anger, what one of my dearest teachers said when we were going through the loss recently, is anger is grief in a little mask. And I just was like, yes, it is. And anger is like the capture of all of our emotions all in one. We don't know what to do with it. So we feel so frustrated and angry because there's nowhere for all this love that we have inside of us to go anymore. We can't, like, the person's not there anymore to give it. So it becomes, like you said, that sacred rage and that anger. And I'm so glad you brought that up, because anger is literally one of the first things when I have spoken to anybody who's been through a deep grief or loss, anger is one of the first things that comes up. And when she said that anger is just grief in a little mask, it just made so much sense. It's like, ah, grief has nowhere to go, so it's angry. And yeah, so what were some things that helped you move through or just really let yourself fully experience anger within grief in a healthy way for you?
Yeah. I mean, naturally, I put a lot of pressure on myself. And when grief happened and it was something new I was going through, I'm just like, I'm just going to give myself a year. Like, no pressure. Grief, you can't, there's nothing to solve. There's nothing to get over. Grief doesn't go away, it
Yeah.
just gets easier to live with. And when I experienced that, in some sense, I kind of felt that took the pressure off.
Mm. That is so beautifully said. You literally like need to quote that because
Clip it.
it's true because it doesn't go away.
I think you taught me that, to be honest, naturally and in my work, I'm a fixer, I'm a problem solver, and then experience this on such a deep personal level. There was no fixing. And so I kind of was just like, okay, like we're going to do this and we're going to welcome whatever that comes, and we're going to feel the emotions without feeling guilty or shame or trying to just jump into work and forget about it. I really was intentional about sitting with my feelings whenever they came up. At least just like, even if it's like for 5 minutes, setting a timer. And it's like, okay, like, yeah, you're in the middle of a work day, but let's set a timer for 5 minutes and cry it out. And then we can move on.
Yeah. Such great tips and tools because when we hold it in, again, grief has nowhere to go and it needs somewhere to go. It's kind of like our inner child in a way. It's like, hey, listen to me. I need you. I need you to be here for me in whichever way that is right now. And we don't know. And we don't know when it's going to come up. It could just be anything that, triggers it for us. And you then have that memory of your dad. And then, the next minute you're feeling all the feelings. And if we block that down and push it down, it has nowhere to go. And so it becomes really painful and hard. And so I'm so happy to just hear that that was your main tool is just simply to let yourself feel it and how much power there is in doing so.
Definitely, and definitely talking about it. I'm such a student and learner and analyze everything. So I was talking about it with a lot of people because I didn't know what to do. I never had been through this. And, I wanted to talk about it because I feared if I didn't, I would shut down. I would turn into a shell. And I just didn't want grief to change me in that way. I didn't want grief to shut me down from life. It was overwhelming, but it was an overwhelming sense of being alive.
Beautiful. I feel like that leads me directly to my next question for you and about grief is what did you learn from grief that you would want to share with others? Like what's your medicine? What would be your medicine for somebody experiencing loss and going through the depths of grief?
Grief is so complex. It's different for everyone. And everyone grieves differently. I mean, within my family too, that was something I had to accept is that we're all on our individual journeys because we all had individual relationships with my dad, and accepting people for who they are and just understanding that everyone grieves differently. And also, I had to take a step back from my own process. I couldn't support my brother, my mom in the depths that I wanted to or normally would have because I was grieving myself.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that and that you did come back to that place where you're like, whoa, I actually need to set some grief boundaries
Yeah,
here.
exactly.
And I know you and I have talked about that. But yeah, like knowing that everybody grieves differently and letting everybody kind of have their process through it
Definitely.
as well. So important. Such an important tip for grief.
Yeah, that's something I was not expecting, but I had to learn and accept early on, and that was very helpful in my process. And also, you know, boundaries. I went out into the world wanting to share my story and my process a little too early, to be honest. I needed time and
Mm,
space to sit with myself and to seek professional help and to have conversations and learn more about this before I was ready to share myself. This is the first time in depths I'm sharing on a public way.
thank you
Um,
so much for sharing your heart in this way. Ah, I love you so
I
much.
love you. This is wild and
Um,
amazing.
I am curious though, because I know that you and I have a very angelic connection. We're both very connected with the angels. And I'm curious if you have felt any or had any like angelic signs from your dad from the other side, or any signs or anything from
Yeah.
dad.
Before my dad passed, I was very into connecting with my ancestors and angels and guides, but losing someone and having them on the other side is so different. In like the best way, in a sense, to know that this person that raised you is now on the other side, um, taking care of you in different ways. And honestly, my dad has been able to take care of me in more ways than he ever could while he was physically here.
Wow.
My dad, yeah, I speak to my dad a lot, and a story that's popping up, but my dad passed in January and my birthday is in May. I remember it being that first year without my dad, knowing that I wouldn't get that happy birthday phone call or that voice note. And I just remember just being hit with a wave of grief and just bawling my eyes out thinking about that moment. And my Google Home literally started singing happy birthday to me, but it didn't say my name. It said happy birthday to my favorite person in the world.
Oh,
And that was totally my dad coming through because I was his favorite person and he was mine. So little winks like that. Yeah, he's been showing me through signs, and also the European vacation. After my dad's funeral and after we had kind of gotten through the midst of all the grief, my mom and I were like, let's go on a trip. We deserve this. Like, let's get out and live life. And my mom's newly retired. And so we booked a 12-day cruise to the Mediterranean. The cruise, the hotel, the airlines, we charged it on the credit card. When it came time to pay the credit card didn't exist.
oof.
Poof. Why
Wow.
is that? Well, my parents, like I said, were married for 44 years, so they had a joint credit card. And that was the credit card that my mom had been charging everything on. Well, they shut the account down because my dad passed away.
Yeah.
He was the primary card holder. So when my mom went to go pay the bill, she said, this credit card doesn't exist. You submitted a death certificate, ma'am. And she's like, but I'm still alive and I charged it. And she's like, but your husband was the primary card holder. We no longer have this account. So
God.
everything that we charged on that card after he had passed, in a sense of wanting to live life and experience life and to spend time with family, it was all taken care of. And that was such a gift from my dad because I've always wanted to go to Europe. My mom always loves going on cruises. So it was the best of both worlds. And that was such a gift from him. And yeah, I don't think I've ever publicly shared that, but it's just, yeah, you can't make that up.
No, he is definitely taking care of you in that way, for sure. I love that story so much. Well, Michelle, it has been so amazing sharing this time and space with you. I do want to just open it up if there's any other last messages or anything else that you want to share with the listeners on anything that we talked about today, really. This is your space.
Yeah, just for anyone listening who resonates with this or might be going through grief, know that you are divinely guided and you are never alone. And as hard as it is, it is teaching you something. And if you sit and listen, that's where the real healing begins. And it is okay to ask for help and support because grief is complex, but it has brought me closer to myself, closer to my family, closer to my friends, closer to my purpose. It truly has changed everything in life.
What a beautiful message to share. And how can people find you or work with you if they want to work alongside you doing this incredible work that you're doing, generational work? How can we find you?
You can find me on Instagram at Michelle Wu, Michelle with 2 L's, and send me a message. I would love to support and chat.
Awesome. We'll put Michelle's details in the details of the podcast below. And Michelle, I know that you know this, but I love you
I
so
fucking love you
much.
too.
We got our puppies at the same time. We just do everything at the same time
We're just the
without
same
even
person.
planning it because we're soul sisters.
We're soul sisters. We literally live parallel lives. And then when we get together, we're like, oh my God, this just happened. And
We just are here for each other and have been here for each other. And I love that about our sisterhood. I'm so honored that we're friends and that we are just doing this together. And thank you for sharing your story today. There's so many gems in this podcast today for anybody listening, going through grief. Like Michelle said, know that you're not alone. And yeah, our space is open for you. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
thank you for giving me this space. I love you.
I love you. Stay tuned for more incredible stories from amazing humans. We appreciate your support so much. Please subscribe, share this podcast with your favorite people, and consider giving us a 5-star review. Thank you so much. We love you.